with us for the 7th James Lee Burke Symposium. From the very beginning, I have wanted a Clete Purcel talk, and I've also wanted oyster poor boys. Well, we don't have the oyster poor boys, but we do have Clete today. Kim Hoffmeister Teche, a fan of Burke and the festival, will speak on Clete Purcel as the archetype of everyman. There's a lot I could say about Kim, but I think the most important thing is that she is a teacher and she's married to a school resource officer, and I think that deserves applause. Resource officer's back there, he's going to keep things moving. Okay. She promised she won't give a test, but I think you're going to love what she has to say about it.
Good morning. I'm both honored and a little shocked to have been asked to speak to you today. Although my husband and I are longtime festival goers, we were here for the first Dave Robichaux Fest, as it was called then. This is our 4th one. I never dreamed of actually presenting. I am simultaneously humbled and proud to accept Claire's offer to return to this year's celebration as a speaker. Just to let you know a little about me. I've been a high school English and math teacher in far north central Illinois for 30 years. I've taught all areas of English and all levels, along with the occasional algebra class. This year, I have seniors and I have freshmen, both ends of the high school spectrum. By default, I'm an avid reader and became a James Lee Burke fan in the early 2000s at the recommendation of my father. I immediately fell in love with Burke's use of figurative language, the descriptions that brought the beauty of South Louisiana into my Illinois home. And of course, I fell in love with his characters. It is my favorite character, whom I will be discussing with you today, a character so beloved in our home that we named our first rescue after him. The unforgettable, invincible Clete Purcel. He was the trickster of folklore, a quasi-psychotic jarhead who did 2 tours in Vietnam and came home with the Navy Cross and 2 Purple Hearts and memories he shared with us. Few people knew the real Clete Purcel, or the little boy who lived inside him, the lonely child of an alcoholic milkman who made his son kneel all night on rice grains and whipped him regularly with a razor straw. Nor did they know the NOPD patrolman who wept when he couldn't save the child he wrapped in a blanket, ran through flames, and crashed through a 2nd-story window with, landing on top of a dumpster. He hated evil and waged war against it everywhere he found it. I sometimes wondered if he was an archangel in disguise, one with strings of dirty smoke rising from his wings, a full-fledged participant in fighting the good fight of St. Paul. That description is from James Lee Burke's A Private Cathedral, and is one of the many colorful illustrations of Clete Purcel, Everyman. Clete Purcel is the ultimate everyman. Not just Robin to Dave's Batman, Clete is a superhero in his own right, and he lives within all of us. Who among us hasn't occasionally entertained the thought of seeking vengeance against evil, such as dumping cement in crooked politicians' pools, or raining retribution onto abusers of the weak? How many of us nurture hidden regrets, lost loves, or lost opportunities, holding ourselves accountable for every misstep along the way, no matter how well-meaning our actions may have been? If given the opportunity, would we not all right a few wrongs in this world, and then settle in with 2 fingers of bourbon and a sigh in a hidden French Quarter courtyard? In literature, an archetype is simply a universal character, theme, or plot line. You all recognize the traditional smart little guy, dumb big guy archetype. We see it in Saturday morning cartoons, but we first saw it in Of Mice and Men with George and Lenny. Harry Potter may be the boy who lived, but he is far from the only child-turned-hero who saves his people by overcoming obstacles along a journey to self-awareness. Archetypes are ingrained in our literature and pop culture, and often in our subconscious. The everyman archetype is no different. According to the article, Know Your Archetypes, there are some common features of the everyman archetypal character, and a study of James Lee Burke novels illustrates how Clete's attributes exemplify this particular archetype almost perfectly. The everyman archetype is precisely what it sounds like: the average, ordinary person who wants to work hard and live a simple life. He or she is every person: you, me, and the guy next door. Unfortunately, these characters are typically put into extraordinary situations and circumstances where they must do their best just to survive or prevail, and hope to return to the ordinary ups and downs of life. Their struggles are our own, and yet far past our own, as they bear burdens for all of us in their unintended happenstance. Clete, try as he might, will never be average, even as he is possibly the most conventional and therefore ordinary person in Dave Robichaux's world. In The Glass Rainbow, Clete is described this way: the libidinous trickster of folklore, the elephantine buffoon, the bane of the mob and all misogynists and child molesters, the brain-scorched jarhead who talked with the dead mama son on his fire escape, the nemesis of authority figures and anyone who sought power over others, a one-man demolition derby who had driven an earth grader through the walls of a mobster's palatial home on Lake Pontchartrain and systematically ground the entire building into rubble. Or at least that was the persona he created for the world to see. Here we see the Clete who rises to the difficult occasion, the hero fighting bad guys, the brawn to Dave's brain. He stomps ass and takes names, an avenging force for good. Even when his purpose is not to save the day, but just peacefully exist within it, he unwittingly has this heroic role thrust upon him. However, we know that there is more to Clete than being the champion of the weak, and that his story is not so simple. The description goes on, but in reality, Clete Purcel was a tragedy. His enemies were many: gangsters, vindictive cops, and insurance companies who wanted him off the board. Klansmen and neo-Nazis had tried to kill him. A stripper he had befriended dosed him with the clap. He had been shanked, shot, garroted, and tortured. A United States congressman tried to have him sent to Angola. But all of the aforementioned were amateurs when it came to hurting Clete Purcel. Clete's most dangerous adversary lived in his own breast. That self-doubt and self-flagellation is, again, something we can all relate to. The voices in our own heads are often the most critical ones we hear, and the ones most difficult to ignore. This is the true mark of an everyman character, when an author makes him or her so relatable that the reader feels an instant connection. As much as we all love and admire Dave and James Lee Burke's Robichaux series, I would argue that Clete, more often than not, steals the stage and the title of protagonist, in large part because of his relatability. We cannot be Dave Robichaux, but we would certainly love to be his nobleman and best friend. Although Clete tries to live a normal life, the events that continually fall into his lap, often because of his relationship with Dave Robichaux, do not allow that. He is constantly facing trials of moral character, forced to handle not only his, but others' tribulations. In fact, one could argue that it is Clete's inherent self-doubt that has created his heroic persona. He is constantly trying to prove to himself that he is not the little boy being punished for his father's shortcomings and disappointments. Again, he is described: to the world he was the trickster and irresponsible hedonist, sowing mayhem and destruction wherever he went. But in his sleep, he still dreamed of two adults fighting in their bedroom late at night, and of kneeling in short pants on grains of rice his father sprinkled on the floor, and of liquid flame arching into a village of straw hooches. If sometimes he looked disconcerted, he would never admit that he had just glanced out a window into the darkness and had seen a dead mama son staring back at him. Clete wrestles with the demons of his past, as do many of us. His doubts and fears were ingrained in him in childhood, much like many adults who struggle to overcome memories that haunt them. Clete grapples with loving his father, despite the abuse he recognizes he suffered. 1 in 4 adults also suffer childhood abuse, and just under 15% were in physically abusive households as children, a fact that unquestionably affects how they deal with life as an adult. So Clete's situation is sadly not unique, but it does help explain how he responds to situations in his world. Clete's battles in the novels are often with his memories, and not just with whoever has had the misfortune to stir his anger. We all bring baggage to our daily lives, and Clete's baggage is bigger than most. However, that is not all that makes him an archetypal everyman. On a positive note, the everyman tends to enjoy the simple tastes and pleasures of life. Clete is never happier than when he is grilling a steak at the Teche Motel, a beer in hand, after a day of fishing with Dave. In its shabby way, his home away from home was a grand place, straight out of another era, with no telephones in the rooms, shaded by live oaks, the slope down to the bayou spangled with autumnal sunshine. That word picture, so typical of James Lee Burke, is one of many that undoubtedly led some of us in this room to wander the banks of Bayou Teche with a hopeful eye for spotting a little piece of Clete's Eden to capture for ourselves. As we venture through the streets of New Iberia, sit in its welcoming diners and bars, and enjoy the warm atmosphere, it's easy to see that Clete would find this a grand place with its welcoming hospitality. However, despite this particularly idyllic description, most everyman characters eventually find that even their relaxation is burdened by their own doings. Everyman characters tend to be friendly, inviting, and understanding, but to a fault. Thus, they often lose or compromise themselves in their efforts to create lasting or meaningful relationships. We see this throughout the Dave Robichaux series, always giving more than he takes, more often than not being taken advantage of, and yet never losing faith that the woman of his dreams will someday be sitting on the next bar stool over. From Dominique the Parisian artist to Emma Pochet to Verena Lemoux, Clete's romantic efforts are seldom rewarded with much more than one-night stands. And often, these dalliances turn into violent and dismal failures as he realizes the women are the antagonists, the villains, or the monsters in his and Dave's latest adventure. And yet, in what one might term reverse misogyny, Clete never blames even the most heinous of women for her actions, instead assuming that it is his own deficiencies that cause the problems in his relationships. In Clete's mind, he was not worthy of a good woman's love, nor did he ever measure up in the eyes of his alcoholic father. His longest lasting connections are with the previously mentioned ghostly Mama-san, who lives on his fire escape, representing the memory of a long-dead lover, and, ironically, Dave's daughter Alifair, for whom he is a bit of a surrogate uncle. Even his own daughter Gretchen was relatively late coming in the Robichaux series, and took some adjustments by both her and Clete to gain a solid place in his life. As he explained to her in Creole Belle, "I want to be your friend, but I don't have much to offer. I'm a drunk, and almost everything I touch turns to shit. I don't care what you did before we met. I just want you to be straight with me now. You want to tell me some things down the track? That's copacetic. If you don't want to tell me anything down the track, that's copacetic too. You hearing me on this? I back your play, you back mine. The past is past, now is now." Although Clete directs this at Gretchen, it isn't hard to imagine him saying it to any woman he was welcoming into his life or his bed throughout the Robichaux series. Unfortunately, that level of honesty was not often reciprocated, leaving Clete vulnerable in ways that cut deeper than any physical wound. This residual pain had an origin that he cannot shake. When death stole the love of your life, no amount of revenge ever healed the hole in your heart. You lived with anger and physical yearnings that were insatiable, and you went about dismantling yourself on a daily basis, tendon and joint, for the rest of your days, all the time wearing the mask of the court jester. This, again, makes him an everyman. Although we have not all lost loved ones to violence, we have all opened up emotionally to people who've hurt us in return. We know the pain of unrequited love, or at least unrequited passion. When Clete hurts, we hurt. because we've been there. Like most characters termed the everyman, Clete is usually an ordinary person who finds himself in situations where his moral compass and dedication to his fellow man force his hand in extraordinary ways. In the Tin Roof Blowdown, Clete would love to simply sit in a bar while awaiting Hurricane Katrina's landfall, but instead he takes on the challenge of apprehending yet another bail skip. His reasoning to pursue trouble as a Category 5 hurricane approaches: you don't surrender the place of your birth either to evil men or natural calamity, he thinks, and that is reason enough. Although his profession would seem contrary to one who is dedicated to his fellow man, as the everyman often is, the reader is privy to Clete's private heart. Clete hired out at nearly pro bono rates to bereaved parents whose missing children had been written off as runaways, or to people whose family members may have been railroaded into prison, or even placed on death row. Child molesters, pimps, dope dealers, and men who abused women got no slack, and feared him as they would the wrath of God. This inherent benevolence is disguised in a tough guy exterior. The reader, however, cannot help but be moved by Clete's actions and thoughts, as hard as he works to hide them from his fellow characters in the novels. His dedication to the weak, the downtrodden, and the marginalized is unswerving, even when it gets him more trouble or hassle than he'd anticipated. This is a true everyman. He does not give up on those who need him, even if it means his own destruction. Next, the archetypal everyman does not admire nor appreciate the elite class in life. We constantly see Dave and Clete at odds with the upper echelon in their world. As a duo, the detective and the private eye are not privy to the higher social status of the New Orleans or even New Iberia aristocracy. The Duprees find them obnoxious. Kermit Abelard can barely contain his spite when speaking with them, and the Belangi family uses them and then tries to discard them. Even when facing his own demise, Lou Wexler mocks Clete in New Iberia Blues. You still hanging around? How about another hole in the brisket? Good try, Blimpo. Despite his inability to fit in with those who are socially or financially his betters, Clete, nonetheless, is never cowed by their disrespect and uses it to fire the flames in his heart. These flames are especially hot for those who Clete believes benefit by hurting or using others. In Light of the World, Clete bemoans political leaders, for example. You know the drill. The motherfuckers who start wars have never heard a shot fired in anger, but they wave the flag and make speeches at Arlington and run up the body count as high as they can. I hate them, every one of them. It's not hard for ordinary people such as ourselves to also feel anger at the ways we believe we are used by many politicians. Clete just vocalizes it better than most of us. More powerfully sometimes, he doesn't vocalize it. He just acts on that indignation. Come back here, Mr. Purcell, the sheriff said. Did you hear me? Sir, don't walk away from me. Yet that was exactly what Clete did, gazing up at the strips of pink cloud in the sky and the trees bending in the wind. Once again, wouldn't we all love to simply walk away from those in our lives who speak down to us or count us out for the ways that we don't meet their elite expectations? Wouldn't it be gratifying to tell some local, state, and federal leaders exactly what we think of them and their policies? Most of us never have the chance, nor the nerve. Clete does. He embodies that rebel spirit on behalf of all of us. Another aspect of the everyman character is the fact that he is genuine and avoids pretense regardless of the opinions of others. In Creole Belle, it is said that Clete was not a fan of complexities, or rules, or concerns about moral restraint when it came to dealing with child molesters, misogynists, rapists, and strong-arm robbers and jack-rolled old people. Clete is who he is, and convention be damned. In a dryly humorous exchange in Light of the World, the local sheriff questions Clete about his past connections with New Orleans mobsters. We pulled your sheet at the NCIC, Mr. Purcell. You have a longer record than most felons. You killed a federal informant and dropped a Teamster official from a hotel window into a dry swimming pool. You and your friend Dave Robichaux left a bunch of people dead on the bank of a bayou in Louisiana, not once, but twice. Clete responds to this in a way that the reader can't help but chuckle. Well, that's why we're here, to rest up. He knows how this makes him sound to the local authorities. He simply doesn't care. He will not kowtow to anyone, regardless of their status in life, which goes hand in hand with the next element of being an everyman. The typical everyman does not necessarily respect authority figures. He creates his own authority through his actions. However, within this creation lies his strength. When it came to courage and grace under fire, Clete Purcel was not an ordinary man. He grew up in the old Irish Channel, in an era when the welfare projects of New Orleans were segregated, and the street gangs were made up primarily of kids from blue-collar Italian and Irish homes who fought with chains and knives and broken bottles for control of neighborhoods that most people wouldn't spit on. He seldom mentioned the specifics of his 2 combat tours in Vietnam. He went there and came back and never made an issue of the psychological damage that had obviously been done to him. In terms of physical courage, he had no peer. He ate his pain and swallowed his blood and never let his enemies know he was hurt. I had never known a braver human being. Because Clete is his own authority in matters of morality and dignity, he does not have to answer to those whom he deigns irrelevant. This is not purely disrespectful on his part. It is, in fact, a bit of a kindness. In Creole Bell it states, "He saw the truth of life, but never pushed that burden onto someone else." Clete believes that by taking on the difficult elements of life, he is not only making the world better for others, but better overall. How many times in his life had he been spared a DOA tag on his toe? Maybe it was for a reason. Maybe his attendance at the big dance was meant to be much longer than he had thought. Perhaps the world was not only a fine place and well worth fighting for, perhaps it was also a neon-lit playground, not unlike the old Pontchartrain Beach, where the admission was free and the Ferris wheel and the aerial fireworks on the 4th of July stayed printed against the evening sky forever. On the rare occasions when Clete can see through the complexities of others with optimism and hope, he is at his best self. As are we all when we place the needs of others above our own. Perhaps you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the concept that, as human beings, our most basic needs must be met before we move up the triangle of complexity. If we don't have food and shelter, we don't worry about security. We must have security before we're bothered with friendship or intimacy, and so on. At the top of Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualization, achieving one's best self. However, while Maslow was putting forth this hierarchy, another sociologist named Viktor Frankl was taking it one step further. After surviving a World War II concentration camp, Frankl determined that people are only truly happy when they have one more step in their hierarchy, one more thing to achieve. He called it self-transcendence. In a nutshell, it means the ability and desire to rise above oneself and focus on others. It's kind of like the JFK motto, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Frankl believed that people are only truly satisfied in life when Clete Purcel exemplifies this to a T. When Clete has a goal, be it a cause, a woman, or most often a friend such as Dave to rescue, he is unstoppable. Hence, one of the best characteristics of the everyman is that he is unrelentingly reliable to those he loves and cares for. Dave understands this unfailing reliability, commending Clete in New Iberia Blues. Clete Purcel was the egalitarian knight, the real deal, his armor rusted, his sword unsheathed, his loyalties unfailing, with a heart as big as the world. Despite his own trials, both physical and emotional, Clete consistently rises to the occasion, whatever it may be, and gives his all to those he loved. Clete practiced a private religion and had a private cathedral no one else knew about. He never told others of his pain, nor would he allow himself to be treated as a victim. He hid his scars, made light of his problems, and despised those who preyed on the weak and those who championed wars but avoided fighting when it was their turn. You could say his value system was little different from that of Geoffrey Chaucer's Good Night. I suspect there was a bit of St. Francis in him as well. He is perhaps the most pure when he is unaware of his own inherent goodness. In his unexpected innocence, he is at his best. Clete Purcel would remain our guardian angel forever, and we would never change the world, but by the same token, the world would never change us. If only we all had or could recognize the Clete Purcels in our lives, the world just might feel like a better place, a little safer, a little more authentic, a lot more colorful, and a place where the good guys do eventually win.
Okay. Thank you for giving us Clete. Now, if somebody could get us the poor boys, we'd be fine. That was excellent. I learned last night, and I didn't want to say this because I didn't want to prejudice anybody, that Tim's presentation was given, now these are my words, a gold star by James Lee Burke. And I think you know why. We teach you, and that was not a piece you did. I want to give credit to one more person before I introduce Sally. Mike, my brother, is the one who suggested Kim coming down here for this. When we were looking for somebody, he said, well, what's that one who comes down from Chicago? That one. So thank you, Mike. He also was the seed for this festival. We can get him to talk about that
And
sometime.
for the ULL Symposium.
And yes, and for me being up here.
That's right.
To continue, my friend and co-conspirator of this symposium, Dr. Sally Donlan, is a soon-to-be retired associate dean in the College of Liberal Arts. She will retire, but her vast interests are going to keep her busy for a long time to come. As long as a long-time Lafayette resident, Sally, for me, embodies the joie de vivre of New Orleans. When we found out that Kim had agreed to do a presentation and was going to do Clete Purcel, I said, because I can throw work for anybody, oh, well, let's then do New Orleans, Clete as New Orleans. That was the original thought on this. I think Sally has taken it into new fields. But Sally.
Thank you. I'm just gonna put this right here. All right, let me get my speech, my talk. Yeah, you know, once I start writing, it's like, once I start talking, you never know what's gonna come out. Before I start, I also just want to say that I'm just so impressed and I'm so happy to have heard your talk. You know, we've been watching the news almost nonstop, and sometimes the only word I can come up with is it's just annoying. It's becoming annoying. But here we are on Saturday morning in New Iberia, and we're here in one place. We've talked about Clete Purcel and Viktor Frankl. Now, when we can say that, it's a good day. So thank you, Kim. Okay, so I'm going to take, Kim gave us and I agree, a gold star on the character analysis. I'm going to just broaden it a little bit, okay, and still talk about Clete a little bit. Clete Purcel and the Old Wound. David Foster Wallace accurately summarizes the importance of reading fiction and how fiction can help us better understand others, saying fiction is about what it means to be human. My daughter is an avid reader, reading at post-university levels from the 5th grade. When she got to university, I thought, sure, she'd major in English, but she demurred. I love to read, Mom, but I just like a great story. I don't like all that symbolism stuff. Today, I'm here to talk about great stories. Specifically, the great stories that James Lee Burke spins about himself and his wives, and Alafare, and Clete Purcel, and the sleepy town of New Iberia, and the urban jungle of of New Orleans in his Dave Robichaud series. I hope to make 3 points with you today. The first being the general importance of story or a narrative frame for communication to the human condition and to the cultures that sustain us. I'll also try to specifically address a couple of the literary tropes underlying those unprepossessing little detective stories that carry so much unexpected psychological impact and the structures that support that impact. Finally, I'll try to tie those two together. When I'm done, I'll have confused everyone, including myself, and we can either engage in a bit of dialogue or move the lectern aside. We'll sit at the table. Claire will help us, and we'll engage in a bit of dialogue among ourselves. So we'll just adjourn and go enjoy a cup of coffee. My daughter is right. The story is everything. For as long as humans have had speech, way before we learned to read and write, we have spun stories. Ever since Cro-Magnon man figured out that mineral pigments like iron oxide and black manganese could be applied to the sides of rocks and caves, we have realized the importance of transferring the thoughts and ideas and practices from one person's head. Stories have always been a primary form of communication. They are timeless links to ancient traditions, legends, archetypes, myths, and symbols. They connect us to a larger self and universal truths. Stories about collaboration and connection. They transcend those hundreds of thousands of generations. They engage us through emotion and they connect us to others. Through stories, we share passion, sadness, hardships, and joy. We share meaning and purpose. Stories are the common ground that allow people to communicate, overcoming our defenses and our differences. Stories allow us to understand ourselves better and find our commonality with others. Stories, in fact, are how we think. They are how we make meaning of life. Call them schemas, scripts, cognitive maps, mental models, metaphors, or narratives. Stories are how we explain how things work, how we make decisions, how we justify our decisions, how we persuade others, how we understand our place in the world, create our identities, and define and teach social values. Stories provide order. Humans seek certainty, and narrative structure is familiar, predictable, and comforting. Within the context of the story arc, we can withstand intense emotions because we know that the resolution will follow the conflict. We can experience with a safety net. Stories, in fact, are how we are wired. Stories take place in the imagination. To the human brain, imagined experiences are processed in exactly the same way as real experiences are processed. Stories create genuine emotions, presence, that is the sense of actually being somewhere, and behavioral responses. Stories, finally, are the pathway to engaging our right brain and triggering our imagination. By engaging our imagination, we can actually become participants in the narrative. We can step out of our own shoes, see differently, and increase our empathy for others. In fact, we say that fiction are the lies that tell the truth. All the bells and whistles are just the platform. In spite of all the excitement engendered by the singularity and its imminent approach, the only thing we care about the singularity is how it will happen, what will happen to us when it happens, and how we will reconcile what happened to us when it does happen. That is, all we care about is the singularity, is its story. All we care about, singularity, is its narrative arc. The human brain is on a slower evolutionary trajectory than is our technology. Our brains still respond to content by looking for the story to make sense out of the experience. No matter the technology, Meaning starts in the brain, and the success of any story rests on the resonance, authenticity, and richness created by the storyteller. The worlds that Burke constructs in his Dave Robichaud books are based on the author's acute understanding of the roles of resonance, authenticity, and richness. For Burke, the challenge is both real and simple, and it is always based at dead center on the very simple paradigm of good versus evil. How Burke shows us that dead center is where his majesty lies. He doesn't just show us. It can sometimes feel more akin to a little walk through the depths of hell to reach that dead center, but the results often surprise us. The stories ring authentic because of the nuance, which when I stand back, as I did just now, to look at story writ large, when I stand back and look at the Dave Robichaud books at a distance, all squinty-eyed, it seems a bit surprising, if not magical to me. This is because the story structure, the narrative is so classically simple in his books, through, and based on a very resonant dual dynamic that is implicitly understood by humans the world over. There are always two worlds. The peaceful countryside, for instance, and the rowdy city, to pick up two of these tropes. Of the city, rowdy city, otherwise known to many as the Devil's Playground. Dave lives in peaceful New Iberia, a sleepy backwater community along a sluggish waterway, but his work often brings him to gritty New Orleans. The locus of his action in that city generally presents a hell's kitchen of grisly characters set amidst an historical and culturally iconic urban backdrop. Most local New Orleanians and visitors, more than 1 million folks, happily flood the Crescent City over the 4 days that comprise the most intensified Mardi Gras weekend. Know nothing of the goings-on we read about, but go on they do, and in fact Dave and Clete plug away in the midst of it. This dual dynamic shows up time and time again in Burke's books as he braves the beauty and community of our land and people with our depraved and sordid underbelly. That yin and yang everywhere exists. But Burke roots it out and cultivates it into some new sort of panoply that at once calms and shocks our senses as we turn the pages and the story turns itself. And that is why those deep dives that Dave flings us into seem so horrific. So this is the underbelly. This is the bottom of the log. One turns over and finds the creepy, crawly, repellent things. This is the dual dynamic, for me, that makes the Dave books tick. The world that Burke has always built for us is just that sort of world. So familiar feeling because of the pictures we read. Even for folks who have never experienced these places firsthand. Kim spoke about envisioning the lovely landscapes even while you were up in Illinois. Even for folks who have never experienced those places firsthand. He is, I'm convinced, one of our most elegantly descriptive modern writers, and the celluloid reels unfurl within my mind as he describes his native Iberia parish. I feel I am there. I feel I am in New Orleans too, as Dave describes lush courtyards dripping with sweat on old bricks and iron gates squiggling with rust, and the giant touchdown Jesus, shadow reflecting on the back wall of the Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis, King of France, more colloquially known as the St. Louis Cathedral. Although we see this literary dichotomy again and again in Burke's narrative, we can see it up close and personal and consistently in his character of Clete Purcel. His sometimes sidekick, alter ego, and social conscience, all wrapped up into one incredible package of blood, bone, muscle, and sinew. Clete's character fulfills the sidekick role admirably, filling in blanks left in Dave's investigations, beating up bad guys Dave just can't quite get to, and embodying stereotypes so familiar to us we don't even bother picking them out anymore. The hooker with heart of gold, the good soldier who saves the village, the one-man's man in the room who respects women for night. But there is more to Burke's simple scheme. As simply as a child with Legos, he constructs his world in levels, layer upon layer. Clete represents all of those things today, but Clete is something else as well. He harkens back to that ancient town and country dichotomy. Clete's pent-up energy and barely contained raw power exemplifies the excitement, danger, and mystery that the city has always held. And not just any city, but the only city that has ever counted for James Lee Burke, the city of New Orleans. For folks who know New Orleans, they may as well know Clete. And more than that, they know why Clete is there. Underneath Clete's carefully constructed rough exterior, lacquered over as it is with liquor, cigarettes, and braggadocio, beats the heart of Holden Caulfield. In my mind's eye, when I think of Clete, I see the 17th Street Canal as the edge of that dangerous rock pool. Other times, he is that little Dutch boy, laying in the cold all night, his little finger in the mighty dike, holding off the dreaded flood from his sunken city. This story, too, is an invention. But when I call on here today, 150 years after that tale was written, to make a point about another made-up tale, such is the resonance of stories. When Dave drops hints about the rich inner personality of his slightly and externally boorish sidekick, we can almost see in our mind's eye the Clete he knows and loves, and we are not really surprised. Such is the richness of Clete's personality, the depth of his humanity. As we learned in 8th grade history, Thomas Jefferson owned many slaves and was not always a very nice man at all. On the other hand, he is largely responsible for leading our nation toward the world's first great experiment with freedom and democracy. People are complex creatures. Clete's complexities come to us through a steady drip of small but dynamic revelations.